Welcome to the eShopperReviews podcast, episode 5. This is the podcast for August 2021. I'm Jen Ip.
And I'm Jake McNeil.
For those new to this podcast, eShopperReviews is a subreddit on reddit.com where Jake reviews games on the Nintendo Switch platform, and you can find this subreddit at the URL reddit.com/r/eShopperReviews. We currently have over 1,400 reviews and counting, and we are supported by your donations on our Patreon, which you can find at patreon.com/eShopperReviews. This month's sponsors are Andy Miller, Reddit user WonderPonder, Johannes, Stove, Ilya Zarev, Eli Goodman, and KC. Thank you all for helping to keep the reviews coming. Now on to the discussion topics for today. Our Patron-Voted game is an Ace Attorney Chronicles.
The Great Ace Attorney Chronicles.
I remember this.
So, as of this recording, we're recording this before the game has come out, and technically before the end of the month, so it's theoretically possible that the votes could change before then, but it looks like this is going to be our patron-voted game, and I was kind of surprised that this was the one that pulled out in the lead, because...
I'm not.
Oh, you're not?
I'm not.
Why are you not?
It's a staple. Ace Attorney games is a staple. Lots of people love this series.
Yeah, but I mean, the other games that were on here, like for example, there was the new Zelda Skyward Sword release, and I thought, you know, maybe people would be more interested to hear my opinions on that one, but I tossed in Great Ace Attorney Chronicles. I thought, well, maybe people would be interested in that, and apparently they were, so that's going to be it. I look forward to giving it a try, and hopefully we will have the review out within a week or so, or maybe the following week after this gets posted. I don't know. We'll see how the schedule works out, but I'll try and have a review out fairly quickly after.
Can you
this.
give us a sneak peek of what you think?
I wouldn't dare to do so because I haven't played the game yet. It would be unfair to give prejudicial opinions about something when I haven't even laid hands on it. Fine. I will say I've played earlier games in the series. I thoroughly enjoy this series. I love the characters. I think the gameplay is great. As far as visual novel style games go, the Ace Attorney games have always been kind of top tier, some of the absolute best in the genre. And to give you an idea, as much as I review tons of these games, because a lot of these games come out on Nintendo Switch, I'm not actually the biggest visual novel guy, but I've loved the Ace Attorney games way back, going all the way to when they first came out in the US on the Nintendo DS.
Okay. Now on to the news, which is going to be very interesting. First off, Nintendo announces Nintendo Switch OLED models.
I kind of had to laugh when this happened because for so long, people kept going, oh, when's Nintendo going to announce the Switch Pro, the new Nintendo Switch, the HD Nintendo Switch? And this is not that. So when we were talking about this prior to E3, and I even predicted this outright. I said, so Nintendo Switch is probably going to release a version of their system that has an OLED screen. And I even said they could just take their current Switch model, replace the current screen with an OLED screen, and release that. Just do nothing else. And it would be better for them because it's actually cheaper for them to make the OLED screens, but the OLED screens are a higher quality just because I guess the manufacturing techniques or what's available has changed. And Nintendo's done basically exactly that, except for they added in a few other small things. It has a slightly better kickstand. It has enhanced audio, whatever that means. The internal storage has been upgraded to 64 gigabytes. It has a new dock with a built-in LAN port instead of, it has one fewer USB port. And those are all minimal changes. And for all of those minimal changes and the screen, which is probably costing them less than the old screen does at this point, they are charging their users $350 instead of the $300 that the current model Nintendo Switch costs.
Right.
And that was the one thing that I didn't predict, but I really should have. It's like they could basically re-release the same thing with the newer screen at the same price and just call it an upgrade. But they're like, we're selling through our current stock of Nintendo Switches. Why don't we use this as an excuse to raise the price? And we can just say, hey, it's a new and improved Switch. If you want that, you'll pay a bit extra for it. And a lot of people got disappointed by this announcement. A lot of people wanted a Switch Pro. I want one that's more powerful, that'll play all my old games with better frame rates, or that'll play new games that'll look better. And it's like, no, you're not getting that, at least not yet. But despite how many people were frustrated by this, how many people were annoyed by this, I bet you anything, Nintendo is going to completely sell out of this when it comes out in October. It's due out October 8th of this year. It's coming in a red and blue model and a really nice looking white model.
Ooh.
Scalpers are already selling this thing at $600. I'm guessing...
How?
Because they've pre-bought the units or something, and then they're assuming they'll get it in time, and then they're selling the scalped units. Yeah, it's the scalper situation is ridiculous, but I mean that's true of everything. Scalpers have been a plague on computer hardware sales and video game hardware sales for years now. You still have inflated prices for PlayStation 5s and Xbox Series units. Even the regular, plain old, boring Nintendo Switch, there was one part where the supply was strained and scalpers were snatching it up and selling them for increased prices.
I'm not surprised.
Anyway, this led to a bit of interesting speculation because there were some industry estimates coming out of Bloomberg that said that this new OLED model Nintendo Switch likely only costs Nintendo $10 more than the previous model, the current model of Nintendo Switch. And as such, Nintendo's profit margins for this unit are likely going to be higher than the less expensive Switch unit. You know, they're only spending a little bit more,
right,
but they're getting more profit. Nintendo refutes this argument. They actually made an announcement to investors saying, no, this report's wrong. We're not getting those profit margins. But if you read between the lines, number one, they could have just used exact wording and basically said, well, we're not getting exactly those profit margins. Number two, they could have incorporated any sort of math into that to excuse it, like saying, you know, oh, we're incorporating the cost of R&D into this. We're incorporating the cost of advertising this unit. We're incorporating the added overhead that the current COVID situation is making. So
that's fair. Although
basically, Bloomberg, I think, was the one who investigated this. And while I don't always buy into what Bloomberg says in their investigations, in this case it's corroborated by other industry analysts who basically said, based on the hardware in this version of Nintendo Switch, it really can't cost them much more than the current Nintendo Switch. Like I said, the big change is the screen, and the screen is believed to cost less than the current Nintendo Switch screen. So if that's the big change, all of these other little minor additions, you know, the network port, the bigger kickstand, all of that can't possibly cost Nintendo too much more than the current unit. So probably Nintendo's going to be making a tidy chunk of change on this. Probably the reason that they announced that, oh, well, that report's wrong is, number one, they don't want investors to get too much of an idea of how bloated an increase in profits Nintendo's going to get for their next earnings report. Because if it doesn't meet those expectations, Nintendo's going to be in the hot seat for, hey, you released this new Nintendo Switch, why isn't, you know, this making tons and tons of profit? And in the COVID era, probably it's best to keep expectations low just in case, like if there's a supply chain problem or something, you don't want that to affect the bottom line and then have people giving you hard stares.
Right. All right, next bit of news. Nintendo may be looking at some competition. Steam just announced the Steam Deck, which is very similar to the Nintendo Switch.
So the Steam Deck is something that Valve is kind of marketing as a handheld computer, and that's basically what it is. It is a computer running Steam's own operating system, but you can sideload Windows onto it if you so desire. It's currently running a version of Linux. And one of the cool things about it is that if you already have a Steam account, that transfers over to the Steam Deck. So if you have a Steam library, you already have a bunch of games that'll work on the Steam Deck. And the hardware inside this handheld unit is pretty decent mid to high-end computer that can run kind of modern games. IGN, I believe, was testing this, and they said they were running Jedi Fallen Order on this and running it at fairly high settings, and it ran really smoothly, ran really well. And a lot of people, after they were disappointed that Nintendo announced the not Switch Pro, looked at this and said, oh, so Nintendo decided that they're not doing a Switch Pro this year, and instead Steam said, well, we'll do that ourselves then.
Okay, so can I read off the specs? Some of the specs?
If you like, yeah.
So it will run with a 1280 by 800 720p LCD touchscreen. It syncs up to your Steam account, as you said. It does have some pretty good tech. That remains to be seen by me, because I have a relatively decent-sized Steam library.
It's pretty good for the prices that they're offering. To give you an idea, the base model of the Steam Deck is selling for $400.
Yep. And
depending on the amount of memory and the type of memory that's going to be in it, it ranges from that $400 up to $650. The more expensive units have slightly improved hardware, like they have a faster solid state drive. But all three units have pretty much the same hardware in them powering those units. They are going to make a dock for it to connect it to the TV, but that...
Very nice.
They haven't announced how much that will cost. They haven't announced a release date for that. We haven't even seen it yet. We just know that it's in the works.
Okay. So it is bulkier than the Switch. It's twice as heavy. The battery life is about 2 to 8 hours, but I mean, for those of us who wanted a Switch Pro, this kind of looks nice.
I'd say yes and no, and there's multiple reasons for that. At least for me, my opinion is, the Nintendo Switch is already pretty bulky for a hardware unit, and this thing is nearly twice as heavy. It's bigger in every dimension. It's thicker, it's taller, it's wider. The battery life isn't as good. As a pure portable unit, if you're just looking for something to bring, like you want to play Hollow Knight or Terraria or something portable, this doesn't look as nice as a Nintendo Switch in that case. But if you are looking to play top-of-the-line modern PC games, or even multi-platform games, if you want to play the newest, well, probably not Call of Duty because there's not too much storage space in this thing, but if you want to play, I don't know, maybe Horizon Zero Dawn, because that got ported to the PC, this is a way to do that, and it should be able to do it with the specs that are in this unit. And that's got to be really appealing. But that's not to say that it's really hitting exactly the same market. Nintendo, of course, has all their first-party properties. It has, the appeal of being a much more portable system for those reasons that I just listed. I don't think that this is going to threaten Nintendo's market share or anything like that. And it's the price in particular. It's basically twice as expensive as a Nintendo Switch. Because if you want to get the entry level of both systems, you're looking at $200 versus $400. If you want to get the high end, you're going to be looking at $350 for the Switch OLED model versus $650 for the high end Steam Deck. I feel like if you are looking to drop a ton of money on a really good portable PC, this one looks very promising.
So, from my point of view, since I am a PC player, I would not play games like Overwatch or Battlefield or any shooter like Apex Legends on the Steam Deck.
You're also used to playing with a mouse and keyboard.
Yeah, but for other games that I have on Steam, off the top of my head, I have Terraria, I have RimWorld, I have some RPGs and JRPGs. I would play it on that.
Yeah, if it's the kind of game that you would normally play with a gamepad, I can definitely see this being very easy to transition to. The controls on this look a bit odd because they're a bit high on the Steam Deck, but IGN has said that they're actually surprisingly comfortable. If you look at a picture of the unit, it also has two trackpads on either side.
I saw
that are meant to kind of emulate a mouse. I doubt that this is going to quite replace something like mouse and keyboard controls on first-person shooters, but it's kind of a reasonable compromise given that, what else are you going to do on a handheld?
Yeah.
And I've heard that these trackpads work fairly well on Steam's Steam controller, which this is kind of that it's based on.
Mm-hmm.
And if you really want mouse and keyboard controls, well, once that dock comes out, you'll be able to pop it into the dock and just plug your mouse and keyboard into that.
Which will be very interesting.
I think this is more along the lines of something where if you want a portable computer and you want to be able to pop it into something and then play it on your TV or whatever, you can do that.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we don't know how much that dock is going to cost. I've already heard estimates that it'll cost something like $100 or something like that. So keep in mind, again, when you're comparing prices between this and Nintendo Switch comes with the dock. It comes with detachable controllers.
True.
So you're looking at two machines that do have some areas where they're comparable and do have some areas where they look similar, but I think that they are different enough that this is not going to be quite the same market as a Nintendo Switch.
That's fair. All right, next bit. Nintendo reveals best-selling games in Japan for the first half of 2020.
I was kind of amused by this list because some of the games are kind of obvious. Some of the games are weird Japan-only stuff that most of us in the States haven't heard of, and some of them I felt were kind of surprising. The list of games that they revealed here, this is just the sales for the first half of 2021 in Japan. They listed the top 30, and I don't know, did you want to run through the whole list, maybe the top 10? What do you feel like?
Let's go from number 30 and then all the way. So,
okay.
Number 30... Little Nightmares 2.
Which I would not have expected that to be a big Japanese seller, but okay.
29, Saga Frontier Remastered.
Got a Japanese RPG. Okay, I can understand that.
28, Overcooked. I have played the second game. I love it.
I know. You haven't played the first one?
I have not played the first one. Oh. I have played the second one.
The first one is very much like the second one, just with fewer online features and stuff. Again,
and now I kind of want to play it with you after we're done with this.
Again, I'm kind of surprised that this one did so well in Japan, but I guess it's one of those that has wide appeal.
27, Xenoblade Chronicles 2.
Again, I was kind of surprised to see this one on the list, not because I don't think this would appeal to a Japanese audience, but because this is many years after this game released, and I didn't think that this would be one that would be showing up on sales lists. But I'm guessing that the fairly recent release of the remaster of the first Xenoblade game might have revitalized some of the interest in the sequel.
Number 26, Pokemon Sword.
Really surprised that it is this far down on the list.
I am too.
I would have expected it to be much higher.
Oh yeah. 25, Bravely Default 2.
That tracks, JRPG, recent game. It's supposed to be pretty good. Haven't played it yet. Yeah. 24, Just Two of Us, Nyanko Great War. I think this is a Japan-only title I'm not familiar with. Okay.
23, which I'm very surprised this game made it on the list at all, Miitopia.
I'm not terribly surprised. I mean, this has somewhat niche appeal, but at the same time it has an appeal to the casual audience, and people who enjoyed the 3DS game might have just immediately hopped to getting it on the Switch. I have never quite personally gotten the appeal of this game, but I totally understand that some people really enjoy it.
22, Game Builder Garage.
I can't say I'm entirely surprised to see this on the list because it's a fairly recent release, but again, I felt like this was kind of a niche game, so I'm happy that it made it onto the list. It's still kind of fairly low on the list, but okay. Good that it's here at least. 21,
Super Noda Game Party.
Again, I feel like this is a Japanese-only release. I haven't seen it before.
Number 20, Dragon Quest XI-S, Echoes of an Elusive Age.
This one also came out a few years ago, but Dragon Quest has always done really well in Japan. Like, the big kind of, it's not true, but it's almost true kind of things, is that Dragon Quest releases come out on national holidays because the sales are so big.
Number 19 is Dragon Quest III, The Seeds of Salvation.
Which is based on the mobile port, and it's a decent but really old school game. It's not super great, but it's not bad. But again, the words Dragon Quest are in the title, which means it's not a surprise that it's selling well in Japan.
18, Rune Factory 5.
Oh, I want it so bad.
I know, I want it so bad too.
But I'd mentioned before, apparently this had a fairly buggy launch. So that's part of the reason why we're getting a delay here, I'm sure.
Okay.
Hopefully they've worked on patching that in the Japanese release, and that might be why we're seeing it on this list. But, yeah, okay.
17, Super Mario Party.
This one, as I understand it, is consistently on the best-selling lists, despite the fact that Nintendo has not done a good job supporting it with post-release content, but it has the words Mario Party in the title, and it's on a Nintendo system, which means that it's going to be a consistent, decent seller.
16, Fitness Boxing 2.
That's interesting. Like, I would kind of expect Ring Fit Adventure to be on there, because that was the one that was most well-known, but...
Same.
I guess maybe because we're talking about the first half of 2021, I feel like a lot of people have already gotten their Ring Fit Adventure fix. I feel like this is maybe people who are like, okay, now what else is there?
Right.
And Fitness Boxing 2 is the closest thing to that that's been released recently on the Switch.
Okay. 15 is Splatoon 2.
Not a big surprise. Splatoon is huge in Japan.
14, Overcooked 2.
Again, really surprised that this is so high on the list in Japan. I had no idea that this had such mass appeal, but hey, credit to them. It's a great game, and glad that it's doing well.
13, Animal Crossing New Horizons.
This clearly isn't as high on the list as it would have been this time last year, because last year it was absolutely selling like crazy, but... Makes sense that it's still on the list because I'm sure a lot of people are still interested, a lot of people still getting it.
12, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild.
I'm a little surprised that it's on the list, not super surprised. Like, it is quite arguably the best game on the Nintendo Switch, but it is also, this was a launch title, so it is no longer new. But I feel like there's still a lot of people getting Switches for the first time, a lot of people who want to try out this, really great acclaimed game, and there are still people who are talking about the upcoming sequels, so I'm sure that that's continuing the interest in this game.
11, Clubhouse Games 51 Worldwide Classics.
Again, I feel like since this game came out, it has really massive appeal. It's really easy for anyone to get into. I mean, it's classic games like, checkers and chess and... stuff like that. So I feel like it's an easy buy for anyone looking for something relatively familiar, even if they've never bought a Nintendo platform before.
10, Story of Seasons Pioneers of Olive Town.
Again, had no idea this had this... Like, it's a top 10 game. I never would have thought that... I mean, this is, kind of like a Stardew Valley Harvest Moon type of game. And I knew that those were well-liked. I had no idea they were this well-liked.
9, Minecraft.
Not a surprise at all. Everyone loves Minecraft. I'm a little surprised that it has that much appeal in Japan, but again, we're talking about the best-selling video game of all time if you include all versions of it.
8, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate.
Not a surprise. This has been a consistent good seller on Nintendo Switch.
7, New Pokemon Snap.
This is a little surprising because I didn't think that it had this kind of mass appeal, but it's one of the big new games Nintendo's put out this year, so yeah, that tracks.
6, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe.
My biggest surprise for this one is that it's not higher on this list.
Really?
Because the attach rate for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is insanely high. It's like, if you have a Nintendo Switch, odds are good you have Mario Kart 8 Deluxe.
Interesting. Number 5, which I am surprised by, Human Fall Flat.
Yep. I would not have expected that either.
I would not have expected that either.
Apparently, this game is much bigger in Japan than it is in the US.
Yeah. In the US, it had like about a month, maybe 2, of popularity, and it just tanked after that.
Yeah.
Number 4, Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury.
Not at all surprised. This was another major release that came out this year. Everyone buys Mario titles. Everyone likes Mario titles. Not a lot of people got this game on the Wii U, so this is kind of a no-brainer, I feel.
Okay, number 3, I am going to butcher this pronunciation. Momotaro Dentsusu Soa Heisei... Oh, God.
Nope, you gotta finish it.
I really gotta finish
I'll try and read it after you, just so it's fair.
Momotaru Dentusu Sowa Heisei Weiwa is also a staple.
Okay, now I'm going to attempt to read this title. Momotaro Dentetsu Showa Heisei Reiwa is also a staple.
Okay, you did it far better than I did.
Presumably. I mean, we haven't heard an actual Japanese person say the name of this game. Obviously, this is a game that has not been released in the US. I have no idea what it's about. If memory serves, I think I saw this game was put out by Konami of all people. And it's like, wow, not only does Konami still make video games, but apparently they made one that sold very, very well in Japan this year.
Okay, number 2, not a surprise, Among Us.
I was super surprised.
Really?
Oh my, yes, absolutely.
I am not.
Number 1, that this is still selling well now, as opposed to when it came out last year.
I'm not surprised.
Number 2, that this is selling so well in Japan. Number 3, this is the number 2 best-selling game in Japan for the first half of this year. This sold better than Mario. This sold better than Mario Kart. This sold better than Zelda. This sold better than Smash.
It's $5.
Yes, it's super cheap, but I never, for the life of me, would have expected
Nope,
this
I'm not
to
surprised.
be. You know what? I've got to hand it to the folks at
Inner Sloth.
Inner Sloth. Yeah, I'm sure that this indie team is just really overjoyed with how well this game is doing. And it originally came out on PC years ago before it caught on, if memory serves. And now they're getting all this recognition, and I just have to feel they've got to be walking around with smiles all day. But even more than the success that this has gotten on the PC, I'm like, okay, I'm not surprised that this has found some success on the Nintendo Switch. It's not exactly the ideal platform for this game. I personally think it works surprisingly well on Nintendo Switch, but I would have thought, okay, this will probably have some success on Nintendo Switch. I never, for the life of me, would have expected this to hit the number 2 spot for a half a year on the Nintendo Switch. The next game, however, the number 1 game, I think that you and I can probably agree, absolutely zero surprise that this is the top-selling game of the first half of 2021 on Nintendo Switch.
So the number 1
Yes.
game is Monster Hunter Rise.
Yeah, that's... I mean, was there ever any doubt? This was...
Not really.
This is the first major Monster Hunter game since Monster Hunter World, if you don't count the expansions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's on the Nintendo Switch, which is hugely popular. I haven't played it yet. I'll get around to it eventually, but it's, as I understand it, it's like the perfect match.
Okay. So, new games added to Nintendo Switch Online Super Nintendo Entertainment System app.
On July 28th, which has not yet arrived for us recording this now, but will be a few days ago after we post this, Nintendo is adding Claymates, Jelly Boy, and Bombuzal to the service. Or if you're in Japan, it's adding Shin Megami Tensei If, Dead Dance, and Bombuzal. And I can tell you, the community response to this announcement was, Nintendo, why do you hate us? There are still games that people are begging to see released on the Nintendo Switch Online service that Nintendo, for whatever reason, has not yet done. They still have not released Earthbound or Earthbound Zero, or Earthbound Origins, as I think it's been called. They have still not released Super Mario RPG. They still haven't released games like Yoshi's Cookie.
Well, keep begging everybody, and maybe Nintendo will get around to it.
At this point, I can't help but feel like Nintendo has their heads in the clouds. They don't really understand what people want, or they don't care, or they have some nebulous reason why they're not adding games like that to the service. And granted, I know there are a lot of other games that Nintendo has good reason not to add to the service for one reason or another. Like, they're not going to be putting licensed games on the service. They're not going to be adding the Ninja Turtle games. Number one, because they didn't make those. Number two, because it costs money to put those licensed games on anything now. They're not going to be putting Final Fantasy or Chrono Trigger games on there because Square Enix has not really done anything on Nintendo Switch Online's NES and SNES apps. I feel like if those games are coming to the Switch, they're going to be selling them for money. But it's like, even if you just look at the games Nintendo themselves could put on there, there's still other games that Nintendo is, for whatever reason, holding back on, and people are mystified as to why. Why do you not give us those, Nintendo? We love you. Why do you not love us?
Nintendo to stop taking credit card payments for Wii U and 3DS games on the eShop in January 2022.
So obviously this isn't Nintendo Switch news, but I still feel like it's pertinent for Nintendo Switch players who maybe still have a 3DS or a Wii U knocking around somewhere. Nintendo is not going to stop purchases of games on these platforms yet. You can still purchase them through your browser. You can still add points to your account and then buy them using points. But they're going to stop taking credit card payments on these games at the end of this year on the Wii U and 3DS, which I kind of view as, it is a harbinger of the end. It is a kind of a warning shot that, hey, if there are any games you want to get digitally on one of these older Nintendo platforms, no, they are not going to be around forever. And while they will still continue for some indeterminate period after this year ends, their time is coming, and it is coming sooner than I'm sure some people would like. I know a lot of people still have 3DSs in particular, and if you were holding off on getting maybe some of those eShop games, some of those virtual console games that you can't get on Nintendo Switch for whatever reason, if you want to play Game Boy Advance games on a portable platform that's reasonably current, look at this as last call. You got a couple of months before you no longer are able to buy these directly through the platform using your credit card, and then maybe a couple of months later, Nintendo will say, you know what, we're not going to take any purchases on these at all after this point. So now's your chance. Get it while it's hot.
All right. So, the next thing we are going to discuss is something rather serious.
Yeah, so before we even start talking about this, let's put out a trigger warning there, a content warning. If you are the sort of person who is bothered by descriptions of harassment, things like that.
Sexual assault, discrimination.
Yeah, I'm going to see if I can figure out how to put a link in the thing to get you to the point in the video after this, if that's the kind of thing that bothers you, because we're going to start talking about some of that stuff, and I like to give people fair warning about that. So you've gotten your fair warning. We're going to talk about more stuff after this, but we're going to go into kind of serious topic matter here.
So, when you and I were discussing this before we started the podcast, I asked you, why are we even talking about this? Because this is not Nintendo.
It's not Nintendo, but this involves a company that puts out multiple games on the Nintendo platform, on Nintendo Switch. And if you play games on Nintendo Switch, you may very well have played some of the games this company makes.
All right, so Activision Blizzard is being sued by the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing over frat boy culture.
So, first of all, I gotta feel like I've seen this term passed around, frat boy culture, and I feel like that almost sounds innocent. Like, oh, ha ha ha, they're just having some fun. And if you actually look at the details of this lawsuit, no, this is not fun. This is really disturbing stuff that they're talking about.
To me, it's evil. It's absolutely evil.
I don't disagree with you there. So the lawsuit, I'm not going to go into details. I'm just going to describe some of what they talk about here. But it's talking about numerous incidents, and it's talking about a culture that's been fostered within Activision Blizzard. But some of the things that they discuss are female employees being expected to work while men play video games drunk. A common practice where men come in drunk and then crawl through the cubicles, sexually harassing women while they're under the cubicle desks, apparently.
Women are passed up for promotion because they are pregnant, or
because they might get pregnant.
Or they might get pregnant.
Yeah. And the one story that a lot of people are talking about, because it's particularly disturbing, is one female employee who got into a relationship with a male supervisor, and apparently he brought sex toys with him to a company getaway, a company retreat to make use of on her during this business trip, this kind of company retreat. But even more disturbing than this were nude pictures that were passed around of this woman at company parties. And this woman later committed suicide, presumably because of some of the harassment that she was subjected to at this company.
Oh, and guess what? Blizzard basically said it's not their fault.
So a part of why we're hearing so much about this is even beyond the lawsuit itself. Blizzard's response to this lawsuit was pretty gross.
And especially gross.
Yeah, and some of the... I'm, again, not going to read the entire thing. I'm sure you can look it up online if you want to see their full statement. But some of the quotes from this statement are... the DFEH, the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing, includes distorted and in many cases false descriptions of Blizzard's past. The picture the DFEH paints is not the Blizzard workplace of today, and they call the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing unaccountable state bureaucrats. So here's the thing. They're basically saying, oh, well, they're just complaining too much about stuff that we did years ago. And, oh, they're totally wrong about this. It's all lies and slander and this kind of stuff. It's not like this is some political entity that brought this up. This is the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing. It's not like these guys are in the news a lot trying to make a name for themselves. Mm-hmm. They specifically said that they've been trying to work with Activision Blizzard to investigate and resolve this, and ultimately felt like they had to sue because they were not getting cooperation. This is not just some disgruntled ex-employee trying to make up charges in a lawsuit. This is a government agency that got fed up because they're not getting cooperation from this company, investigating very serious complaints. And it's like government agencies are not often known for bringing up frivolous lawsuits.
Oh, no.
But beyond this, this has been corroborated by Jason Schreier, who's pretty well known amongst game journalists. His quality of reporting is pretty consistently good. And he's basically said, oh yeah, I've talked with multiple Activision Blizzard employees who have basically said, yeah, this all tracks. This is very in line with what I know of this company. And I also want to point people to, I'm going to try and link to this video in the description or down below. I'll figure out a way to link to this video. Alana Pierce has talked about this, and I definitely recommend watching her video on this. She talks about it for 10 or 15 minutes. Alana Pierce has experience in pretty much every side of the industry. She has worked on video games. She currently works for Sony Santa Monica. She's worked doing voice acting in video games. She's worked as a game journalist. I believe she worked for IGN. And she is also currently a vlogger and Twitch streamer. So it's like pretty much every role in the industry you can think of, more or less, and every general role she has played a part in. And she said, well, she hasn't worked at Activision Blizzard. She cannot comment on that directly. She has said that this kind of activity is not unique to Activision Blizzard. Her biggest takeaway from this is, I'm actually surprised that so many people are surprised by this. This is kind of common within the video game industry, mm-hmm. which is, it's really sad, but I'm not terribly surprised. People with short memories might have forgotten, but Ubisoft got accused of doing very similar stuff like just half a year ago, it feels like.
Yeah, Riot Games.
And yeah, Riot Games got accused of something very similar.
Very similar. Yes.
This is a story we've heard repeatedly, time and again, that sexual harassment, sexual discrimination, that women time and again are targeted within this industry. And
it's vile.
It's frustrating. It's disappointing. It's enraging.
Yeah. And
so the other bit of a news story, this actually just came out before we started recording this, and it's a fun little addition to this story because Activision Blizzard basically said, oh, well, that stuff is old news and most of it's not true and we didn't do any of that and this government agency with their bureaucrats is just making it up. over 20 current, not past, current Activision Blizzard employees have publicly refuted their company's own public statement. And here are some of the things that they have said on Twitter and Facebook and elsewhere. And again, these are not low-level employees. A lot of these are people in charge of major parts of World of Warcraft and other games within the company. Many of us will not be working today in solidarity with the women that came forward. The statements made by Activision Blizzard do not represent us.
I'm unhappy with the corporate response up to this point. I don't feel it represents me or what I believe in.
To claim that these stories are factually incorrect or untrue is a slap in the face to current and former employees and does not represent my core values.
Really hope that Blizzard puts out a statement on this situation that I actually agree with and can support, and not more legal defense posturing, because the stuff said so far is unacceptable and doesn't represent me, and I know I'm not alone in feeling that way here.
I've heard horror stories, all of which I know are true and shouldn't be dismissed. The fact that Activision Blizzard dismissed it not once but twice is appalling.
I do not support any attempt by AB to diminish the very real damage done to victims of harassment at Blizzard.
These past few days have made me furious at the company I work for, but so proud of the people I work with. Everyone is rallying together, listening, speaking out against the atrocious responses, and demanding action. We are here, angry, and not so easily silenced. And I put this quote last in my list of the quotes that I felt were noteworthy because I feel like there's something I need to highlight here before we go into kind of the second part of this discussion, which is video games are not made by just one person who does good or bad things. You know, it's not the president CEO who's in charge of making video games who snaps his fingers and a video game appears into existence. Video games, especially these major releases, are made by dozens or hundreds of people. And while there are certainly probably many people who have been responsible for these bad actions that we've talked about, I'm sure there are many people within the company also who are just as shocked and appalled by all this stuff as we are. I mean, certainly some of them are closer to it and knew that it was happening and maybe felt powerless to do anything about it. Because when you're surrounded by a bunch of yes men and people who are okay with what's going on, it's a lot harder to speak up to power. Going back to what Alana Pierce talked about, and again, I highly recommend that people look up that YouTube video. One of the things she mentioned was her experience going to HR to complain about some of the sexual harassment she was on the receiving end of. And her story was basically, HR looked at this and basically said, you know, how can we minimize how much this affects our company? You know, we don't care about you, the person. We care about the company and minimizing liability and stuff. So do not look at this and think, oh, they have an HR department, so they care about their employees. No, HR isn't there to protect the employees. They are there to protect the company. And I would say, I'm not going to detail everything that Alana says. You really should check out her video because she goes into more detail and it's really disgusting how that story in particular ended. But I will say, and this might seem like a political statement, but screw it, I'm going to say it. This is one of many reasons I feel like people in the video game industry need to unionize, because they need to be protected against exactly this sort of thing. And there's no one within their company who's going to protect them from their company.
Oh, I agree. I wholeheartedly agree. And as an afterthought, I think a lot of people know that I play a lot of Blizzard games.
Mm-hmm. We've talked multiple times before about how much Jen thoroughly enjoys her Overwatch and World of Warcraft.
Yep. And on that note, I actually have uninstalled both of those games and Battle.net. I don't know if or when I will reinstall them. I will be keeping an eye out on this case. But for now, I'm just not playing those games. I am just very fed up with how all of these major game studios are treating people of color and women. I'm sick of it, so I'm just not going to support them for now.
And to be clear, we're not just talking about Blizzard here. We're talking about Activision Blizzard which for those playing games on the Nintendo Switch, we're talking about Overwatch, we're talking about Diablo, but we're also talking about games like Crash Bandicoot, we're talking about games like Tony Hawk, which kind of leads me to the next part, which is this. The subreddit that I run, the eShopperReviews subreddit, I review video games, and I kind of went back and forth over how to respond to this. Should I just not review games by this company? And I know there have been multiple bad actors in the industry. We just discussed Ubisoft for one, or Ubisoft. I'm not sure how it's supposed to be pronounced. And I feel like I have to be feeling a version of what I think a lot of people who are ethical and trying to think of the ethical way to do things must be feeling, which is, if I truly care about this and want to act on this, how do I do this in ethical fashion? Because it seems like wherever I turn, I'm hearing about these bad practices. So first, let me speak to what I, as the person who runs this subreddit, am planning on doing, and then I can try to address what you, as a game player, can try to do, which is this. For me personally, I feel like regardless of whether or not I review these games, they are still going to sell as well as they would have otherwise. Game reviews don't necessarily translate into game sales. I mean, we all saw how well Cyberpunk sold despite that it was getting trashed in reviews.
Yep.
And I feel some responsibility to the people who read my subreddit to review these games and let people know my honest opinion on what I thought about them. At the same time, I also feel the need to make sure that people know, hey, this is something that this company does, and if you purchase this game, you are kind of helping to support that in a way by giving this company your money. So I feel like a part of my responsibility is to continue to put this information out there, and the best place to put this information is in the review itself. So what I'm planning to do going forward is, I'm not going to change the way that I go about reviewing games. I'm not going to stop getting these games to review, but in the future, moving forward, when I learn about these kinds of activities, I am going to mention them in the review. I'm not going to let these activities be reflected in my review score, because again, these games are made by, at times, hundreds of people, and it's not fair to their work to say, oh, you did good work, but I don't like what your company as a whole did, so I'm lowering the review grade. That's not quite right either. But at the very least, if I put this information in the review, if I talk about these bad actions, then when you are reading these reviews, you have the power in yourself to make the choice. Is this something that I feel comfortable buying this game, or do I maybe want to not? And that goes back to the other part of this topic, which is you as someone who presumably cares about this. If you're looking to buy a video game, how should you respond to this? I'm sure that a lot of people feel kind of helpless, surrounded by all of this negativity. Oh, this company did this bad thing. This company did this bad thing. And I feel like, number one, everyone has to make that decision within themselves, what they can feel okay with, what they can not feel okay with. But number two, know that it's okay if you don't have an absolute response to this. If you don't go cold turkey and say, I refuse to buy any game by any company that does anything bad. Because I understand, for someone who loves video games, for someone who this is a part of your life, that is a really difficult thing to commit to, especially when it's a minefield out there, knowing what to support and what not to support based on what you believe in and what you feel is disgusting in the industry. But at the very least, if you can look at this and say, I can buy game A, which does this bad thing, or I can buy game B, which their company doesn't do as much that really bothers me, maybe then if you're choosing between those two games, you might decide to buy game B instead. Or maybe there's a game that comes out from this company that does this nasty stuff that you don't support, but it's something that you just desperately need. I'm not going to tell you not to buy a game that you really, really want because their company did bad stuff. But maybe in the future, consider giving them less of your money. Maybe that should be consideration when you're making your buying decision. And if you don't really, really need that game, maybe spend your money elsewhere. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. If you can spend a little less of your money on these companies that do these bad things, that's better than doing nothing at all, at changing nothing at all. So that's my personal thoughts on this. I don't know, Jen, what do you think in regards to that?
I generally agree with what you've just said. I do think that it's going to be impossible to know if every game studio you purchase from is going to be ethical or not. That's what investigative journalism is for. But I guess to stay aware, and there are other things you can do besides not buying a game. There are petitions you can make. There are, hopefully the video game industry will get a union. There are other avenues.
I don't see that as realistic, particularly soon. It's a topic that comes up, but it just doesn't seem like there's been enough of a groundswell of movement behind that happening to make it happen just yet. I don't know what would cause that to come about, but I can only hope it happens someday.
Okay.
So, moving forward, specifically for games from Activision Blizzard, I will include a warning about some of the things that this company has done in the past, and I'll try to provide a link to more information in my reviews of their games. I'm planning on doing the same thing for any games from Ubisoft, because again, they've done some of the same things, and their response has been somewhat inadequate, I feel. So I will continue to monitor for additional activities that I find unsavory and post about these in the review. I will not let these affect the review scores for the game itself, because the game itself is its own thing. And you the viewer, you the player, you the listener, however I'm referring to you, can make your own choices over whether or not you feel like you're okay with spending money on these.
All right, so back to the more lighthearted stuff.
Yes, hopefully we'll be able to link it in the video or something, so you could skip past the previous section if you want to skip over some of the content warning-y stuff.
Alright, so some of the highlights for the games of eShopperReviews we have covered in the month of July 2021. Just a note here, these are not necessarily games released in July, but games reviewed in the last month, and we'll start by talking about the best games.
Alright.
The first one is Doki Doki Literature Club.
So I mentioned this in the previous month's announcements and went ahead and reviewed it this month. And I'm going to be very careful talking about this game, because this is a game where if you talk too much about it, it can get into spoilery territory. But this is a visual novel, and at least on the surface, this is a visual novel that appears to be a fairly lighthearted kind of...
And I'm going to stop you right there.
I can describe the initial, opening.
But
it appears to be a fairly lighthearted kind of otome game. You have multiple girls who your male main character is kind of interested in, and you get to choose which one of them to pursue. But suffice it to say, later on in the game, things get weird and dark. Stop. Just no. I do feel like I need to warn people, if you are looking for something lighthearted,
okay, fair enough,
do not get this game. This is a game that kind of needs to come with a content warning. There is stuff in here that can be potentially triggering, that can be kind of, like I said, dark. And
so
I won't go into
the lighthearted stuff.
I won't go into description here, but I will say this is a game that does some really interesting things with the genre. It's been on the PC for a while now, and the way the game is made is kind of designed around the PC as a platform. So when they ported it to the Nintendo Switch, they actually had to emulate some of that stuff in interesting ways. And again, not going to go into descriptions, but I will say, as far as a console port of this game, they did as good of a job as one could expect bringing this game to the console. They added in a lot of supplemental content, a lot of side stories and stuff. Overall, this is an excellent port of a game that would have been kind of difficult to port to consoles, but they did a pretty darn good job of it. If you like visual novels, and if you're not afraid of kind of, again, some of that content warning-y stuff, this is absolutely a game I'd recommend. It is... I'd be surprised if you haven't heard of it previously if you're a fan of this genre. It is well known within the genre, and for good reason.
Alright, next one in the best games. The House in Fata Morgana, Dreams of the Revenants Edition.
So this is another visual novel, and I swear I did not plan this. It's not like... And I'm not the biggest visual novel guy in the world. In fact, on the whole, I would say I'm not generally big on visual novels in general, but I had to hand it to these games. Two of the best games that I played this month were visual novels. And House and Fata Morgana is a bit more of a traditional visual novel, but it's, again, also a pretty dark game. I would say that the story in this game, it starts out playing out like a series of vignettes. It's all connected to this mansion that's supposedly cursed, and you're introduced to this kind of mysterious, sort of creepy maid who's taking you on a tour of this mansion. And for each of the rooms, it has a story behind it related to one of the prior residents of this mansion. And the kind of inevitable conclusion to each of these stories is that the people related to this room met with an unfortunate end. But exactly what that unfortunate end is and how it came about is something that you gradually find out as you're told these stories. And one of the things that I thought was really cool about this is they're really well told stories. The artwork here and the music is very good, but kind of a little off and creepy as well, which is fitting to these sort of stories. And I was reminded a lot when I was playing this of Twilight Zone and Black Mirror, because these stories all have some kind of twist or something to them, but they actually have multiple twists, and I couldn't always predict just where things were going. Like, sometimes I'd see one twist coming up, but wouldn't see the one right after that. And the framing device that ties them all together, this mansion, it does eventually come back to show that there's more going on here than initially appears, but again, won't go into that spoilery territory. But I will say, each of these stories are, at least initially, fairly well self-contained. They're very well told. Each of the stories takes a little time to really get going, and if you're impatient, you might find yourself getting a little bored at the beginning of each of these stories. But if you give it a chance, if you're patient, and if you see it through, they tend to pick up and get more and more interesting as they go on, until the point where by the end of the story, I'm kind of at the edge of my seat trying to see where it's going. And then it gets into the next story, and I'm like, oh, yeah, this is kind of, it's okay. And then it picks up, and it picks up, and it gets better, and it gets better. And I really enjoyed this. The stories were really great. I think the fact that, again, the stories are kind of separated into little vignettes works very well with the Nintendo Switch. Again, if you're a fan of visual novels, you've probably already heard of this game. It's pretty well known in those circles. And if you have not, it's definitely one to look up.
All right. The last game in the best games, Sky, Children of the Light.
This is a free-to-play game. It does have some microtransactions in it, but I felt like the stuff that is being sold is of minimal interest to me. It's like mostly social elements and like clothes and stuff or greetings that you can get. So I didn't think that it was particularly bothersome, the microtransactions. And this is an absolutely beautiful experience. I didn't much care for those social elements, but I felt like this is very much in line with the developer, That Game Company. That's their name, That Game Company. Their previous work, Journey, was very similar to this game. So if you'd ever played that one, honestly, that's one of my favorite games on the PlayStation platform. It's a beautiful experience. And this, very similarly, is also a beautiful experience. I don't feel like it was quite as poignant to me as Journey was. I feel like Journey had a simple elegance to it that this game kind of overcomplicates a bit, but it's still very much in the same vein. And given that it is a free game, I highly recommend, if you have a Nintendo Switch, please by all means play this game. It's a beautiful experience. It's not going to be for everyone because it's kind of light on gameplay, but if you're okay with that, it's visually absolutely stunning. In particular, the kind of visual effects they have for clouds in this game are amazing. I strain to think of another game that has made clouds look as beautiful as they have in this game. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 comes to mind. It's another really good one, but I think this might very well top it. It's visually actually one of the best looking games on Nintendo Switch this year. And it's a free game, which is kind of shocking, but well worth playing. And again, because it's free, no reason not to.
Okay, on to the worst games.
All right.
The first one is Fly the Bird.
Oh boy. So Fly the Bird, it's a very simple game where you are flying through a corridor. I mean, kind of like the original Star Fox, except there's no combat, there's no obstacles. It's just you moving the bird around and trying to fly it through rings, which is simple, but would have been fine, except the problem with it is you are constantly increasing in speed, and within maybe 30 seconds of the game starting, your speed will be so fast that it is literally impossible to continue flying through the rings in time. It's not even a matter of reaction time. You literally do not have the time to move from point A to point B in time. And you automatically fail and are kicked out of the game, and that's it. That's the entire game. Is 30 seconds of, oh, this is okay, but kind of boring. Wait, this is going too fast. What the heck am I supposed to do here? I can't do anything, and I just lost. That will be your entire experience of this game in the span of 30 seconds, and if you keep playing it, it'll just be that 30 seconds repeated over and over and over again. It's pointless, it's stupid, it's infuriating. Do not waste your money on this game. It is terrible.
Next one, Castle of No Escape.
Castle of No Escape, I feel like it was an interesting idea, but there's just not enough meat on those bones. It is a dungeon crawler where you have multiple floors that you can move between. Each is a single screen, and each single screen is subdivided into multiple squares that are not revealed until you walk into them. And when you walk into them, you find out if it's a chest, if it's an enemy, if it's a bonus item, whatever. And the idea is you're going through the entire dungeon, revealing all of the squares, and you're collecting all of the goodies from the good stuff, and you're fighting all the enemies until you're strong enough to fight the final boss, who is also on one of the squares. And the enemies do not move around. Nothing moves around. So once you reveal something, if you run away from it, you can always come back to it. It'll be in the exact same place. And everything is tied to a random number generator. And that means that when you start a game, within your first dozen encounters or whatever, you'll either lose because the random number generator hates you and wants you to die, or you will kill everything that you fight and succeed in your randomness until the point where you're so powerful that you'll just steamroll over everything. And so you'll either die very quickly, or you will quickly get powerful enough that you'll be able to beat the game within half an hour. And there's not really any challenge here. There's not really any significant choices that the player makes. The visuals are not great. The sound is not great. I will say the sequel to the game, which I also reviewed this month, does some different things. It's in a different genre, but it still kind of honors what this game was going for, and that fares much better. It's still not a great game, but it's much better than this was. This game, like I said, I feel like it was a decent idea what it was going for, but it doesn't have enough meat to justify buying it. It's all down to the random number generator.
Okay. Next one is F-117A Stealth Fighter.
This is actually a port of an old Nintendo Entertainment System game. It's comparable to the classic game Top Gun or Afterburner.
Oh, okay.
But so games in those days, they didn't have 3D graphics, so they kind of had to use 2D graphics to emulate that. And this game does so very poorly. So it's hard to tell where things are, first of all. And I feel like the gameplay in this is just so dated and so old-fashioned. Even compared to those classic games like Afterburner, this is still kind of not a good game by comparison to those. And so one wonders why anyone would take the trouble to port this game of all games from the Nintendo Entertainment System to the Nintendo Switch. But the publishers behind this game decided to do it, and more power to them, but it's not a good game. Even if you like flight sims, it's so dated it is not worth playing.
Blastful.
Blastful is a two-stick shooter that presents itself as a shmup. Vertical scrolling shooter. Mm-hmm. And that's fine, but this game starts by being just completely boring and unoriginal and doing nothing interesting with its genres at all. The enemies aren't smart, they aren't visually interesting, they don't have interesting movement patterns, you don't get any interesting weapon upgrades. However, it goes a step worse than that, because if you hold down the firing button, your fighter fires at such an incredibly slow speed that it is virtually unplayable. You have to keep clicking in the button, and because this is tied to the trigger button, it is actually physically strenuous to play this game in any kind of practical way, because you're constantly curling your finger over and over and over again.
Just getting those finger cramps.
Ugh. And even if it didn't have this problem, this would be a pretty boring, uninteresting, not at all noteworthy game. But then it tacks on to that this terrible control issue, and it's like, I can't imagine any reason anyone would play this game instead of the countless other better shmups and two-stick shooters on the Nintendo Switch. You have so many better options. Why would you play this garbage?
Alright, the last worst game is Drawngeon, Dungeons of Ink and Paper.
Drawngeon, like dungeon, but drawn. And
I mean, that's such a great name.
It is, and at least in theory, it has a cute concept. It's a first-person dungeon crawler where everything looks like it's been scrabbled onto a piece of paper with a pen. And that's kind of a cute idea. The game does nothing to justify this concept. Like, there's no story to explain why things are drawn this way. I feel like the only reason that the game has this style is because the game's designer just, they didn't want to bother putting in actual decent artwork. Mm-hmm. And again, that's not great, but it's not going to make something that's truly awful. What really makes this game awful is that it is one of the most joyless experiences I have ever played on the Nintendo Switch. There's no music, there's no decent sound, everything is dark and it looks ugly, and the controls are not great, the menus are not great, you're not given any good story to follow. The second that I jumped into this game, I was immediately repulsed by it and didn't want to continue. But, I'm reviewing it, so I have to continue. And the game just kept refusing to give me any reason to want to stay into this, in this joyless, dark...
Yikes.
And not dark in like a, ooh, this is dark and eerie, or, Dark Souls-y. No. Dark as in, it just looks ugly and doesn't entice me in any way to want to continue. Mm-hmm. And nothing that this game did changed that initial impression of it. It is just repulsive.
Okay. On to the hidden gems, which is only one. Knights of Pen and Paper 2 Deluxiest Edition.
So, the funny thing is I did not have many hidden gems this month, because all of the games that might otherwise be considered hidden gems ended up being the best games. All of those games are fairly, somewhat lesser known. Doki Doki Literature Club is somewhat well known, but I mean, they're, a couple of visual novels and a free-to-play game. But all of the bigger games that I played this month, I'll talk about in a moment, were games that I didn't think were the best games, I didn't think were the worst games, or just kind of middle of the road. So the only game that didn't quite make my best games list, but I would still consider it, fairly a hidden gem, was this game's Knights of Pen and Paper 2. And I played through all of the Knights of Pen and Paper, Galaxy of Pen and Paper, all the games in that series this month. I think Knights of Pen and Paper 2 was the highlight of the series. And the premise of the series as a whole is, it's kind of a game within a game, where you are playing as people playing a tabletop role-playing game, and you're also playing the tabletop role-playing game that they're playing. And as you're playing the game, you're upgrading the characters in the game, but you're also making decisions as the dungeon master about what kind of monsters to toss at these characters, what kind of, that kind of stuff. And you are also making upgrades to the room that your players are in, which have effects in the game that they're playing. So it's a cool kind of meta thing. There's a lot of really good meta humor in this game. A lot of jokes about how these are characters being played by other characters. And they handle that humor very well in this one. And I felt like out of all the games in this series, Knights of Pen and Paper 2, first of all, did the best job of balancing good gameplay with good story elements, where it had that good kind of meta story that I'm talking about, but also didn't let that detract from the gameplay too much. And the other thing is pretty much all the games in this series have a bit of an issue with being a bit on the grindy side, and I felt like the second game in the series did the best job with having a good steady progression to it, where you didn't feel like that grind was too burdensome. It actually was kind of a little fun to grind in this game because you felt like you were making steady progress.
All right. So, other noteworthy reviews for this month, Mario Golf Super Rush.
This was the patron-voted game, from the previous month's poll. I reviewed this fairly early into the month, and in short, I didn't hate this game. I didn't love it. I will say this is designed by Camelot, who makes the Mario Golf and Mario Tennis games, and I liked this a good deal better than I liked Mario Tennis. The core gameplay in Mario Golf Super Rush is good. It has good golf gameplay. It's not perfect, it's not great. There are still some flaws with it that I wish could have been ironed out. But overall, good golf game at its core. The problem is, well, first of all, it feels like it has a jack of all trades, master of none thing going on, where it tries a bunch of different things that are all in and of themselves interesting, but it doesn't commit to any of them enough to make them truly great. It has a single-player campaign that's kind of like an RPG mode, but there's not enough choices, there's not enough variety in how you can progress like you had in a game like Golf Story, where it actually played like an RPG. So the campaign mode was kind of lackluster. It has this new speed golf mode where you are golfing and then you're running to catch up to the ball and you're bashing into the other players as they're doing the same thing. And it seems like it would be the perfect kind of mode for a party game. But first of all, I didn't quite feel like this worked out as well as I would have liked. And second of all, you can only play with 2 players locally, which kind of defeats the purpose of having a party game-ish mode. They also had another mode called Battle Golf, where you have this arena with multiple holes that you're trying to hit balls into in real time while other players are doing the same thing. And I loved the idea of this mode. I wasn't when this game was coming up, I wasn't anticipating this mode being interesting. I actually really liked it. But again, it has that same issue of it's a game that seems like it would be great for a party kind of situation, only 2 players locally.
That's a shame.
And I feel like I really wish that Nintendo would have just pursued one of these and really pushed it to be better. That Camelot took the RPG mode and made it into a full RPG, or that they went into the battle mode, the battle golf mode, and made sure that it would actually work as a party game with 4 players at least. And for whatever reason, each of the game modes in here had some sort of fatal flaw that didn't make it terrible, it just made it feel like a lesser version of something that could have been great but wasn't. Overall, good game, but not a great game.
Alright. Next one is Paper Mario the Origami King.
Here's another one that I feel like it was good. It wasn't great. And the Paper Mario series, it's hard to get around the fact that how you feel about this series in part depends on whether or not you played the first 2 Paper Mario games. Because people who have swear by those 2 games and tend to feel that the entire rest of the series has lost its way. Those first 2 games were considered truly great classic RPGs, and everything else, it's like Nintendo is messing with that formula and trying to do weird, wacky things that ruin the formula. And this is yet another game in the series of trying to do weird, wacky things that bring it away from that classic RPG thing. Now, for me, I try to judge each game on its own merits as well as, where it fits in the industry. And if you put aside the fact that it's not really that RPG that a lot of people were wanting, it's okay, but even then it still has flaws. Like, the combat in this game is basically a kind of a sliding block puzzle of sorts, where you're sliding tiles around Mario and trying to line up enemies so they fall into a line or to a 2x2 box. And if you can get the puzzle just right in a certain amount of time or a certain amount of turns, then you win the puzzle and you win the battle. There's not really anything in the way of experience or leveling or anything like that. Like I said, they got away from the RPG side of things here. And as a result, it means that there's not really any good reason to get involved in these battles, which just makes them tedious. It means whenever they pop up, you feel like you're wasting your time, and it kind of makes you wonder why you're even bothering with the battles in this game at all, why they're even there. But Nintendo felt like doing something kooky and original, and it brings down the pacing of what's otherwise a really fun game. It's pretty looking, it has some really good writing, some really good humor to it, but man, every time you get into one of those battles, it drags it down, and I just came away from this feeling like, even if you don't compare it to those classic Mario, more RPG-styled games, this still feels like it's doing some things that make it a worse game than it could have been.
All right. Next game is Pokemon Unite.
So, my opinion on this game changed dramatically the more that I played it. When I first started this game, I was thoroughly enjoying this. This is a MOBA-style game. It's free to play, designed by Tencent, or a subsidiary of Tencent. And it's very polished. It looks really nice. The basic gameplay is mostly very good. There's some control issues that I have a problem with, but for the most part, it's really solid from a mechanical standpoint. But the problem is that the more I looked into it, the more that the vicious, malicious, microtransaction-y side of this game came out. And this has become a big discussion point among people who are playing this game. So I felt, first of all, like the progression in the game is heavily stifled by this microtransaction stuff. Like you will quickly get 3 or 4 Pokemon early on, only one of which you'll actually be able to choose which Pokemon you get. All the other ones you get automatically, they're assigned to you. Mm-hmm. But one of your early Pokemon, you get to choose from like 5 or 6 different Pokemon which one you get. And then after that point, you will earn Pokemon at a rate of, I judge it, maybe 1 a month, maybe 2 or 3 every other month, somewhere around there. Mm-hmm. And with the number of Pokemon in this game, there's something like 20 of them. I kind of judged it at, you will maybe be able to get all of these Pokemon within the span of a year if you are playing the game constantly.
Wow.
However, progression isn't the only thing this game does. This game uses something like 5 or 6 different kinds of currency. I actually went in and counted them. They're all listed in the review. I'm not making this up. I'm not exaggerating. It is absurd. And some of them don't seem like currency. It's like levels or something like that, or it's tickets, or it's whatever. But progress in different areas is gated off by these different kinds of currency. And of course, if you want to get that cool outfit, or if you want to get that loot box that's not actually a loot box, but it's definitely a loot box, you're going to have to spend that currency. And, oh, you don't have enough of that currency? Well, you can trade gems for that. Oh, you don't have enough gems? Well, you can buy gems. Why can't you buy the currency that actually is? Because we want to make this intentionally confusing so you don't know how much money you're spending on the game. Mm-hmm. In addition to that, this game has some pretty significant pay-to-win elements. And I see this being a point of contention in the community. Some people are like, oh, well, that thing, it's only 1% difference. And it's like, no. Each Pokemon that you play in this game can equip 3 of what are called held items. Each held item can be upgraded something like 30 times or something like that. And it's upgraded, of course, using currency that you can trade real life money for, or,
of course,
trade it for gems, which you can trade for the other kind of currency. Mm-hmm. Because nothing is straightforward in this game, because they don't want it to be straightforward, because heaven forbid you know how much money you're spending on the game. Mm-hmm. Anyway, to give you an idea, one of these held items that you will never be able to upgrade to its full amount without spending currency on, unless you are spending an absurd amount of time in this game. Just as an example, there's an item called a muscle belt. This muscle belt does 2 different things. I'm only going to discuss one of them. So this is 1/2 of 1/3 of the items that you can store on one of your Pokemon when you're fighting. At the start, the muscle belt increases the attack rate 0%. At its fullest, it increases the attack rate 7.5%.
Yikes.
And anyone who's played these types of games knows that 7.5% is a huge difference, even if you're just talking about combat between two characters who are otherwise the same. That's the difference between winning a battle and losing a battle. But it's not even just about a direct confrontation between two Pokemon who are otherwise the same. Because as you're fighting in this MOBA, your character is gaining experience within that match and leveling up and gaining more power, which means that they are exponentially getting stronger the longer the match goes on and distancing themselves farther from the competition. There was a video I found of someone who actually spent $100 powering up all their Pokemon's held items, and they were completely destroying the other team in their territory to the point where teams were quitting the match because this one guy spent money on his Pokemon. Wow. That is how much pay to win this game is. So I am not exaggerating when I call this pay to win. It is absurd, it is disgusting, and this is a game where it's Pokemon. Children love Pokemon and are being exploited for cash. Like, hey, bust out your parents' wallet. It's just a little bit of money for a few gems, which you can trade for this, and then you can get that thing you want. And, oh, you lost that match to that other player who spent more money than you? Well, there's something you can do about that. I'm just saying. Just disgusting. And it's so sad because the core game it's built around is really fun, actually. It's pretty accessible, but it's one of the most disgusting microtransaction fests that I've seen on the Nintendo Switch in a while.
Everybody hates pay-to-win games.
Oh, yeah. And it totally doesn't need to be. There are other free-to-play games on the Nintendo Switch that have microtransactions, but are nowhere near this sleazy about it. They use it for cosmetic items only, or something like that. There's even other MOBAs on the Switch, like Smite, that are far less, like they don't get anywhere near as despicable with their microtransaction junk as this one does.
Okay. Next one, which I will probably butcher the name. Wise 9 Monstrum Nox.
I think it's pronounced Ease, but I don't know. So the previous game in this series, well, the previous game was almost a retro style title, but the previous numbered title in this series, Ease 8, is actually one of my favorite action RPGs on the Nintendo Switch. It's not a great port to Nintendo Switch, but the actual gameplay itself is just so good, and the progression is good, the grinding in it is great, and it's visually nice to look at, even though it's kind of not a great port. And so I was really looking forward to Ease 9, and while I like some of the additions that this game has made to the gameplay, like your character now has kind of special abilities based on your character that allow them to move in some unique ways. Like the main character, Adol, has kind of an automatic teleport where you can teleport to certain places that's really cool for traversal and moving around in this game. And all of the different characters have different abilities that really add a new element to the gameplay. But first of all, the core game itself, the first hour or two of this game is so boring. It starts with just some really slow and ugly stuff, and it doesn't get to some of the better elements of this game. Some of the stuff from the previous game that for a while I was like, did they even bring that back? Doesn't get to that for at least a few hours of gameplay. And so, okay, that initial couple of hours is kind of bad. But then the other issue is, this is not a good port, and I'd really hoped, because this was a game that was actually made from the ground up with the PlayStation 4 and Nintendo Switch, I believe, were the two platforms that it was being made for. So I was like, okay, because this isn't a port, because this is a multi-platform game, hopefully that means that they'll be able to do a better job. And I would argue in some ways it's even worse. The frame rates in particular really, really chug in places in this game. And it's still a good game. It's still a good action RPG. But I was just so terribly disappointed with this. And it's like, compared to its predecessor, which was also a bad port, this might even be worse. And
yikes.
Between the two, I would recommend Ease 8 over the sequel, and it's so sad that I have to say that. And don't get me wrong, I still like this game. It's still a good game, but if you're going to play it on the PlayStation, because this is not a good port, and don't expect it to be as good as the predecessor, despite that it has some elements that do make it better. But I felt like, man, that early part of the game really dragged.
All right. So normally we answer patron-submitted questions, but this month we didn't have any. Anyone who donates on Patreon can have their questions answered in the monthly podcast.
Since we didn't get any user-submitted questions, how about a Jenn-submitted question?
Damn, put me on the spot, why don't you?
We can look at this as encouragement to our listeners. You know, if you want to ask a better question than Jenn can think up of on the spot, you know, totally submit our questions when we put our call out for questions, and you can get your question read on this podcast.
Okay, I got one.
All right.
What sort of meal or food from a video game you would actually like to try?
I mean, I suppose I've been kind of curious about some of the foods in, like, cooking games, like some of the dishes in, like, the Cooking Mama series, for example. I was not expecting a question like that. I'm not entirely sure.
Well, we are both foodies and gamers.
Some of the dishes that you can make in Breath of the Wild are interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of anything specific. I know that they had some, like, simmered vegetable plates that looked interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I am kind of curious what Mario's mushrooms taste like.
Psychedelic, probably.
Jeez. Oh, that is a surprisingly interesting question. I was not expecting that at all.
I'm sorry. Did I put you on the spot?
You did. I'm curious what the cake from Super Mario 64 tastes like.
Okay.
I'm also curious what the cake from Portal tastes like. You know, the one that's a lie.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think, what are some well-known video game food items that I'm not thinking of? Like, I tend to think of video game food items, and I'm like, I don't know why that's even a thing. Like, in Final Fight or games like that, you punch a trash can, and there's a whole cooked chicken in it, and your character will bend down and eat the chicken in a second. It's like, dude, you just ate a whole garbage can chicken. What's wrong with you, dude?
I want to try some of the dishes from Final Fantasy 15.
I haven't played Final Fantasy 15 yet.
Really?
No, I have a lot of them on my PlayStation. I just haven't gotten around to them yet.
Okay.
I don't think I've played any of the mainline Final Fantasy games after 12.
Another thing I want to try, and there are recipes for it online. I don't remember if I'm recalling the name correctly. It's the sea salt popsicles from Kingdom Hearts.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hadn't even thought about that. That doesn't actually have me curious. Like, how would you even do a salt popsicle?
I can show you that later.
Okay. Like a salt... Is it salt flavored, or is it, like, dusted with salt to enhance the sweetness or something?
I don't know. I'll show you later.
Okay. Let's see. I'm trying to think of other famous, or not famous, but well-known, like, food items. Battle Chef Brigade, there were a bunch of food items in that game that looked interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Darn. You stumped me, Jen. I don't know what to tell you.
Okay. Well, that wraps things up for this month's eShopperReviews podcast. Again, we want to thank all of our patrons on Patreon for contributing. Patreon donors are the first ones to gain access to these podcasts, and if you are interested in becoming a donor, please check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/eShopperReviews. And once again, if you're curious to read any of the reviews or content mentioned in this podcast, you can find it on the eShopperReviews subreddit at reddit.com/r/eShopperReviews. Once again, this has been Jen F.
And Jake McNeil.
We'll see you next month, and in the meantime, we both hope you found some of this content helpful and enjoyed some good games. Catch you next time.
Later.